This week on Jerusalem Dateline, archaeologists say an historic discovery reveals more of what the temple where Jesus taught looked like.
This is the very floor upon which the coins were rolling when Jesus turned the tables of the money changers upside down.
And an exclusive interview on the concerns many have about how the Muslim Brotherhood could influence the U.S. presidential campaign. Plus, how the heroes of the 1517 train to Paris subdued a terrorist on the loose and saved dozens of lives. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. This week we're coming to you in the desert with the Dead Sea behind me. Last week we had a story about how these plants, the balm of Gilead, could be used in a future Jewish temple. And this week we have a story where archaeologists say they may know more of what the temple where Jesus taught looked like 2,000 years ago. But first, in countries not too far from here, Christians and other peoples are suffering a genocide. Groups met in Washington, D.C. to discuss the crisis and personally call on lawmakers to do more. Abigail Robertson has the story.
The greatest humanitarian crisis of our era is unfolding in the Middle East, with thousands of Christian populations facing genocide.
The video depicts ISIS gunmen shooting the Christians in a desert area. It also shows ISIS killers beheading other Christians on a beach.
My daughter has nightmares and screams in the middle of the night. They're coming to kill us.
And some of the world's oldest Christian artifacts and churches ruthlessly destroyed.
The terrorists tried to erase Malula's Christian heritage by shooting up icons. They used knives to desecrate a depiction of the Last Supper.
A group called In Defense of Christians organized 3 days of events in Washington, aimed not only at getting lawmakers to address this issue, but also to discuss how American believers can get involved.
The sad reality is we're seeing things actually get worse. In Iraq, in Syria, and even in Lebanon, we're seeing increasing challenges facing our communities there. So I think we've yet to turn the corner and yet to kind of sort of witness any of the progress that we'd like to see.
Leaders from In Defense of Christians say one of the greatest hopes for ending Christian persecution in the Middle East is by bringing awareness to evangelical Americans who can advocate for their brothers and sisters around the world.
What the Middle East Christian diaspora are very often saying is once this issue ends up in the hands of American evangelicals, that will be the thing that changes the issue and saves Christianity in the Middle East.
Duran suggested American churches can help by adopting a refugee family, sponsoring trips to safer parts of the Middle East, and lobbying elected officials to create safe havens for those suffering.
Engaging in advocacy, calling their members of Congress, calling their elected representatives, telling them that they care about the Christians of the Middle East. I think the leaders from the evangelical community taking site visits all around the Middle East, going to refugee camps, going to IDP camps, telling the Christians that they care, showing them that they care, and then figuring out humanitarian and political solutions to the problems that they face.
IDC and other groups believe that if enough congressmen fight the issue, the administration will be pushed to get involved too. Reporting from Washington, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Please continue to pray for Christians and other groups suffering genocide in the Middle East. On a more positive note, Israeli archaeologists announced they discovered what the floor of the second Jewish temple looked like. It's an amazing story of how the new discoveries are bringing both the past and the Bible to life. This major find came as archaeologists reconstructed 2,000-year-old tiles from the second Jewish temple built by King Herod.
These are the very floors upon which the high priests and the priesthood and the pilgrims who came to the Temple Mount walked. And this is the floor upon which Jesus walked when he came to the Temple Mount.
This discovery resulted from a controversy in 1999 when tons of debris was illegally removed from under the Temple Mount to build an underground mosque.
Now we have the pieces of the flooring tiles for the last 12 years of work from the soil of the Temple Mount. We identified them already some 10 years ago, and we understood that they belonged to such floors.
The Temple Mount Sifting Project began in 2004. For more than a decade, volunteers and staff from Israel and around the world have been examining the debris from the Temple Mount and making historic discoveries.
This is the first time that we are able to restore one of the elements of the architecture of the Second Temple in Jerusalem.
Archaeologists confirm the authenticity of these pieces based on the various sizes, materials, and technique by which they were made.
I never thought that I will be able to find something that is so much connected to the temple proper.
Project Director archaeologist Gabi Barkai pointed out why this achievement should be important for Christians.
This is the very floor upon which the coins were rolling when Jesus turned the tables of the money changers upside down. This is the very floor upon which those coins were rolling.
We have several different stories where Jesus is sitting with his disciples in the porticos, and he's teaching them right there. They're sitting right here on these floors.
Researcher and mathematician Frankie Snyder played a key role in putting the tile patterns together.
This is the first Herodian pattern I was actually able to reconstruct.
Snyder restored the ornate patterns combining geometric principles with comparisons to designs at Herod's palaces.
You find that in the Herodian patterns, the mathematics is impeccable. The sizes, the shapes, how they're putting these things together is just amazing.
So far, about 600 colored stone floor tile pieces have been discovered.
It's sort of like putting together a puzzle, but without a box top. You don't know what the picture's going to look like, and you only have about 1% of the tiles. We're not out to try to prove anything. The temple was there, but we can show you more clearly exactly what was there.
For years, present-day visitors to the Temple Mount imagined Herod's temple was made from white stone. Now Barkai says the restoration of the floor tiles gives a deeper understanding and appreciation for the glory of the Second Jewish Temple. The Second Jewish Temple stood on the Temple Mount 2,000 years ago until the Romans destroyed it in 70 AD. Now the Al-Aqsa Mosque sits on the Temple Mount, and it's one of Islam's most recognized structures. But just a rumor about Israel threatening the site sends Muslims around the world into a frenzy. It's a dishonest tactic aimed at not only undermining Israel, but Judeo-Christian values as well. It's one of the most holy and contested pieces of real estate on earth, the Temple Mount. For decades, Islamic leaders have incited Muslims to violence by telling them that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is in danger. First, they claim that the Israelis were undermining its foundations to make it collapse. Now they also say it's a threat even for Jews to pray on the sacred plateau.
Extreme movements believe that Israel is planning to build the third temple and to destroy their holy shrine.
Known in Arabic as the Haram al-Sharif, or Noble Sanctuary, it's the place where two consecutive Jewish temples once stood. The second was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. Now, Muslim mosques occupy the site. Al-Aqsa was first built in 705 AD. In Muslim theology, the site precedes the Jews and goes back to creation.
You know, Adam, when he descended from the heaven, he came here and he was pray here.
No different between Sulaiman and King David and all the prophets is all the same. They're all been in Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Today, the entire plateau is referred to as Al-Aqsa. Nadav Shragai wrote the Al-Aqsa is in danger libel, The History of a Lie. He says when Muslim leaders want to unite the masses, they claim it's in danger.
The match that ignites the people and brings them to the streets and causes violence is this libel. Al-Aqsa is in danger and this is baseless.
Archaeologist Dr. Gabriel Barkai says there have been excavations near the Temple Mount, but never under it.
One of the cornerstones of Western civilization was never touched by the spade of the archaeologist.
Barkai says it was Muslims, not Jews, who began digging in an attempt to rewrite history.
Since the 90s, there were many destructive diggings going on in the Temple Mount, which were not for archaeological purposes, but the contrary, for destroying archaeological data.
Around 2000, the Islamic religious authorities dug up thousands of years of history with bulldozers from under the Temple Mount to make room for a giant mosque. Barkai headed an operation to save artifacts from the discarded material. Years later, Archaeologists and volunteers still sift through the debris. According to Shragai, then Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini started the libel against Israel in the 1930s. He accused the Jews of wanting to collapse the mosques on the Temple Mount. That led to Muslim rioting and murder of the Jews, just the first of many incidents. Islamic expert Dr. Yitzhak Reiter says the tactic hasn't lost its potency.
They really believe in what they think. The Al-Aqsa is in danger as long as Israel is controlling the eastern part of East Jerusalem.
In 1969, the Muslim world blamed Israel for the arson attack on the Al-Aqsa Mosque by a visiting Australian Christian. That lie continues today. More trouble in 1996. The worst Israeli-Palestinian violence in 30 years broke out when Israel opened an exit for visitors to the Western Wall tunnels half a mile from Al-Aqsa. And in 2004, rain, snow, and a minor earthquake toppled the entrance ramp to the Temple Mount. That provoked an international Islamic uproar when Israel tried to rebuild it. We asked Muslims in Jerusalem what they think.
It's in danger. To destroy him, to take the place, it's in danger.
They are digging underneath it and digging and digging, and they don't find anything.
God will save it.
Experts say it's important the West takes notice now, because millions of Muslims believe the lie is true. They say if it brought violence in the past, it will do so in the future. Coming up, could the Muslim Brotherhood have an impact on the U.S. presidential campaign? The answer when we come back. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. The United States is in the middle of an intense presidential campaign, and Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton is getting a lot of scrutiny about the relationship with her closest aide, Huma Abedin, and Abedin's relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood. David Brody talked about this with former Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann about the concerns many have about this relationship and what it means for Israel.
What is the main concern that you have as it relates to some of her connections with her mom and her father, or her late father, and some other folks that have been there? What's been the main concern? Does it have to do with security clearance and some of the other issues here too?
Our federal government says you do not get a security clearance as a federal employee if you have family connections or relationship connections that could in some way imperil the security of the United States for obvious reasons. My question was whether or not Hillary Clinton and the State Department had granted Huma Abedin a security clearance. Why? This is why. Huma Abedin's father was a senior member of the Muslim Brotherhood. Her mother was a senior member of the Muslim Sisterhood. The Saudi royal family asked Huma Abedin's parents to leave Michigan, where her father was a PhD and was teaching in Michigan. They asked them to leave Michigan and travel to Saudi Arabia and set up a magazine that ultimately became called the Journal of Minority Muslim Affairs. What this journal did is look at countries that were not Islamic countries, and they tried to push the advancement of Sharia law in countries that were not Islamic. So you have to ask yourself, what was the purpose of the Muslim Brotherhood? The purpose was to establish Islamic Sharia law everywhere. Huma Abedin's parents were senior members in that organization with that purpose. Then you have to ask yourself, what was the purpose of the Journal of Muslim Minority Affairs? In countries where Islam is not the law of the land, like the United States, their goal was to push or advance Islamic Sharia law in countries like the United States. So that was the family business. Her father began the magazine. Her mother also was involved with the magazine. Huma Abedin was listed as an assistant editor, deciding what they would print, what the stories would be on this magazine.
For quite a few years.
For 12 years, she was listed on the masthead. Her brother was on this organization, this magazine, and her sister was. So this was the family business, advancing Islamic Sharia law in countries where Islam was not the dominant religion. The Bible tells us who we surround ourselves with makes a big difference in who we are. Who has Hillary Clinton surrounded herself with? Hillary Clinton's #1 chief aide since the early 1990s is Huma Abedin. While Mrs. Clinton was a United States Senator for 12 years, from 1996 until 2008, Huma Abedin's name was listed as an assistant editor on the masthead of a magazine whose purpose was to advance Islamic Sharia law in non-Islamic countries, i.e. the United States of America. And from what I know of federal law, she never would have been given a security clearance to be anywhere near the First Lady or near a United States Senator with those kind of more than questionable family relationships. Who a president surrounds himself with, I can't even tell you how profoundly important it is. The Bible tells us whoever speaks into the king's ear, that's who you need to be praying for, those counselors. Take a look at Hillary Clinton, Huma Abedin, the people that she is surrounding herself with. When she is president of the United States, the enemies of Israel will be lifted up. I believe the enemies of biblical Christianity and biblical Judaism will be at risk.
Up next, they're the heroes of the 1517 train to Paris. Find out how these boyhood friends stopped the terror attack in its tracks. Welcome back. As I mentioned earlier, we're coming to you in the desert where they're growing the balm of Gilead. And not only that, but this plant, it's frankincense, the kind of frankincense you get in the Bible. Well, what would you do if you were confronted with the terrorists with an AK-47 and a backpack full of ammunition? Well, not too long ago in our CBN studio, I talked to two men who knew what to do and saved dozens of lives in the process.
American tourists Anthony Sadler, Alex Scarlatos, and Spencer Stone boarded a train from Brussels to Paris on August 21, 2015. A heavily armed ISIS terrorist named Ayoub el-Kazani was also on board. But when Kazani began to carry out his attack, he ran straight into the three Americans who jumped into action, risking their lives to disarm and subdue Kazani and saving hundreds of lives in the process. They tell their story in a new book, The 1517 to Paris, the true story of a terrorist, a train, and three American heroes.
Two of those American heroes, Anthony Sadler and Spencer Stone, are here with me now. Alex Scarlatos is off on military training and couldn't be here. Anthony and Spencer, great to be with you.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for having us, sir.
Tell us what happened exactly on the train and what did alert you that something was wrong?
Well, Anthony and I were actually asleep at the time, and a train employee ran down the center aisle in between us, and that commotion kind of woke us up. I had headphones on, so I took them off. I looked over at Alec. He was kind of turned around in his seat. Looks like he sees a ghost. I hear glass breaking, people screaming. I look towards the back of the train myself. First thing I see is Ayoub coming through the doorway, shirtless, with a backpack strapped to the front of him, and he's bending down, picking up an AK-47.
Yeah. So, Spencer, you knew something was wrong when you saw the gun, obviously.
Yeah.
So, what was your initial reaction?
I mean, I think everyone was in shock. There was a second. I kind of looked back, and I looked to see if anyone was going to do anything, and no one was. And so I figured, you know, I had no hope that we were going to survive this. I just thought we were going to die right then and there. But he hadn't started shooting yet, so I figured, hey, I'll give it a shot. So I took off, and I ran straight at him. I had about 30 feet to cover, but luckily he actually pointed at me, pulled the trigger, and
he did.
He did. The firing pin struck the primer, but it was a bad primer in the bullet. So I mean, it's just another a work of God that was, you know, in that moment that kept us alive.
Yeah. So Anthony, you were right behind Spencer at the time?
Yeah. At the time, I was asking myself, like, is this really happening? When we initially saw the gunman, and within seconds, Spencer had gotten up out of his seat to tackle him, and then once I saw Spencer get up, it was more instinctual for me and Alec just to follow our friend into battles.
Yeah. Did you? So you weren't thinking much about it. You were just instinct. You just went ahead.
I think it was just instinct and survival, and just the way we're raised to, I guess, put others before ourselves and trust God, and luckily everything worked out.
So when you got to the terrorists, what happened there?
I tackled him. He, initially hit me with the gun as I ran up to him, blinded me in one eye. I started bleeding. Not a great way to start off the fight. I was able to, scuffle with him a little bit. I do jiu-jitsu, so that kicked in for me. I put him in a rear naked choke, and that's when Alec and Anthony ran up, and eventually we got to beat him up a little bit, and then eventually choked him unconscious. But he cut me in the back of the neck with his box cutter twice, trying to almost slit my throat, cut my left thumb down to the bone, severed my tendon and nerve, and it was just it was a crazy situation, but we eventually just choked him unconscious.
Do you think this is a lesson for today of how to respond in attacks that may happen, whether it's Orlando or San Bernardino?
I think our story kind of changed the narrative a little bit. Too often in the media you hear about terrorism and mass casualties, but I think our story provides a different light to that, and nobody even lost life in our situation, including the gunman. So I think it's a blessing, and I think we hope that the readers and everybody in the world, it changes the narrative a little bit, that maybe these things can be averted in the future.
What role do you believe faith had to do in what you did?
100%.
Everything.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, there's just a list of miracles that happened. Even just getting us to that point and having everyone there on the train with specific skill set was just a miracle within itself. It's like we had the perfect people in place, and me and Anthony and Alec all feel the same way. We were destined to be on that train, and everything we had done prior to in our lives led to that moment. And I feel like we used every single skill we picked up along the way in a matter of 30 minutes.
Yeah, and you've written a book called The 1517 to Paris. And in the book, do you think this is another way for people to learn the lesson that people need to know right now?
Yeah, I think it's a good reflection, and I think it's a good tool that is out there and people could use, and we hope that our story provides some hope to people out there in this world today where terrorism is so prevalent, and we just hope that it changes the narrative a little bit.
Thanks for what you did, Ordinary Heroes, but I think it's a great, as you said, Anthony, it's a great way to change the narrative of all the things that are happening in the world today. Yeah. Up next, a bird's eye view of Jerusalem. Welcome back. We'll leave you this week with a beautiful view of Jerusalem from above. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us throughout the week on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.